promote knowledge production. But of course, what we are doing here is also a reflection of the wider spirit of the Kuliah and the university itself. In my humble view, an event like this is important as it celebrates and publicly recognizes achievement in knowledge. No doubt an occasion of this kind is vital for the sustainability of the value and meaning of scholarship. Book learning, reading and writing have always been central to humanities, and I believe that they are still crucial for the cultivations of one's soul and mind. We remember scholarly giants in humanities not because they have invented satellites or mobile phones, but because they have produced literary and scholarly masterpieces that change our view and outlook of the world. Indeed, by writing and publishing the political history of Muslim Bengal, Mr. Mahmudur Rahman has shown his dedication and commitment to scholarship. I'm very sure that his effort and contribution can be a source of inspiration for all of us here. Lastly, let me express my deepest gratitude to all of you for being here, and I want you to know that your presence really matters to us and it makes this occasion meaningful. Thank you. Wabillahi taufiq wa hidayah. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam, Doctor. Thank you very much. And now we move on, ladies and gentlemen. We have the pleasure to invite Associate Professor Dr. Arshad Islam, the coordinator of the book launching ceremony, to give his speech. فليتفضل مشكورين.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Young Bhagya Professor Dr. Isarji Haji Sharuddin, covering Rector of International Islamic University Malaysia, Mr. Mahmudur Rahman, former advisor of Bangladesh government, guest of honor, deputy deans and HODs, brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. It is an honor for me to share my views on this important occasion. Mr. Mahmudur Rahman, himself an editor of popular daily of Bangladesh, Amar Desh, is well-known political and media personality in Bangladesh. His book is a great read and must be for scholars of Bangladesh and South East Asia. Modern Bangladesh, an independent country of 163 million people, among 98% ethnic Bengali people are there, and of course 90% of them practice Islam. So this is one of the largest of that area, a Muslim-dominated country. Again, you find that this book gives an overview of rich and complex history of Bangladesh from ancient times to the present day, particularly exploring the consolidation of Islam in Bengal in the beginning of 13th century. It gives a detailed analysis of the interactions between Muslims, Hindus, Buddhists, and other communities. The book suggests Mahmudur Rahman's strong and unequivocal support for the Islamic ethos and identity of the Muslim majority Bangladesh, as much as his unflinching commitment to the integrity and sovereignty of the native country, and befits true lover of Bangladeshi independence. The book has 12 chapters, complete with the epilogue, a number of historic illustrations, appendixes, and bibliography. The illustrations include various historical and archaeological sites from ancient urban centers and tombs and mosques and temples. More importantly, they include the images of almost all the leading political figures from the time of British occupation to the present. The entire book is a rich source of information, particular interests of modern readers, students, researchers, and academics. They will find it rewarding and refreshing as an extremely useful and invaluable reference work. Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Thank you, Dr. Arshad Islam. Ladies and gentlemen, we move on now with the speech from the Dean of Kulliyah of Islamic Revealed Knowledge and Human Science, Associate Professor Dr. Shukran Abdul Rahman. فليتفضل مشكورين.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي آمين. Thank you, Brother Chairperson. Yang berbahagia Professor Dr. Isarji bin Haji Siruddin, Covering Rector of International Islamic University Malaysia. Mr. Mahmudur Rahman, former advisor, Bangladesh government and author. Guests of honors, deputy deans and head of departments. Brothers and sisters, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh. I would like to welcome all of you to the International Islamic University Malaysia, especially the Kulliyah of Islamic Revealed Knowledge and Human Sciences. The Kulliyah is indeed very pleased to witness the launching of another book or another publication in this university. Indeed, it is in line with the direction of the Kulliyah, which is currently focusing on or enhancing the publication of academic work by both her academic members and also authors from outside the university. For your information, the Kulliyah is currently engaging various groups and levels of community to work together with her, including in the publication of academic work. And the community here involved the community of learned people. Okay, we are very pleased today to be joined by the community of scholars. We believe that this would enhance the academic culture of our university. The Kulliyah thus would like to congratulate the author as well as the Department of History and Civilization for making this a reality. So we thank you very much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you, Dr. Shukran. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we are graced by the presence of one of our own former professors who is now with Istanbul Sahir University. With all the honor, we'd like to invite Professor Abdullah Al-Ahsan to share with us a few words. فليتفضل مشكورين.
Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. As-salatu was-salam ala Rasulil Kareem. Honorable Professor Isarji bin Sardin, Mr. Mahmudur Rahman, former advisor, Bangladesh government, Associate Professor Dr. Shukran Abdul Rahman, guest of honor, the Deputy Deans, Head of the Departments, brothers and sisters, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum. As I walked in, I'm sorry, I become so emotional sometimes when I saw Dr. Fauzia. I remember Dr. Wan Sohana, who just passed away a few days ago. Well, this is our life. I joined this university in 1990, and many of our colleagues now were our students at that time. It feels good to be back with this environment where I have spent almost 3 decades. I'm grateful to the organizers for inviting me to this occasion. It's a very noble occasion for me because the kind of work that as a student of history, I am supposed to do, Brother Mahmudur Rahman has done that. You see, I was born in East Pakistan, and Pakistan was achieved in the name of Islam. Muhammad Iqbal, who is supposed to be the person who had dreamt about Pakistan, and Muhammad Ali Jinnah, who came up with his two nations theory, none of them were nationalist, Indian nationalist, Pakistani nationalist. Both of them were followers of Indian nationalism. They thought that Iqbal said, "Sara jahan se, Sara jahan se acha hai, Hindustan hamara." Anyway, I'm not good in quoting Urdu poetry. The point is that he was loving India. But after working with International Congress for decades, both of them realized that it would be very difficult to live with Congress mindset. And it is this which has led to their demand for a separate nation for Pakistan, for Muslims in the form of Pakistan. And after more than 70 years, with the rise of BJP, you can see that their vision was so correct. And it's not only in India, you can see the rise of ultra-rightist nationalists in so many parts of the country, or of the world. And that gives me this, again, brings me back to the idea of Pakistan. Iqbal was a student in spending time in Germany, and Germany at that time witnessed the rise of rightist nationalists. And it is this idea that convinced him that this kind of nationalism without any ethics is not going to be helpful for mankind. Now, when I see history books in Bangladesh, you can clearly see that there is no mention about the achievement of Pakistan in 1947. And that is the major problem of history writing. History has been manipulated so much. Today, we are talking so much about Islamophobia, but Islamophobia is not a new phenomenon. It has been there in the form of some kind of what Edward Said called Orientalism. It has been there. And because Pakistan was achieved in the name of Islam, there were many forces which were actively involved in dismembering Pakistan. And of course, if you look at official papers of Indian National Congress, you will find that Indian National Congress never accepted Pakistan. But unfortunately, we Muslims are we are not very careful about our history. And as a result of that, we have become victim of others' conspiracies. Of course, it is not wise, I would say, to blame others for our own faults. Of course, we have been deceived with some history textbooks, but what we have called here in this university Islamization of knowledge is to correct that kind of perception of history. if you look at some kind of conspiracies, like just look at the rifle of this New Zealand, the Australian who shoot in the mosque in New Zealand, what he has written on his rifle. And you can see that their grudge against Islam so deep. But we have not tried to correct those perceptions. It is not the responsibility of others. It is our own responsibility to correct it. Unfortunately, I have myself spent almost 40 years in teaching history, and yet you know that the textbooks on human civilization produce some kind of understanding of the worldview which is opposed to our fundamental faith. The fundamental question that I encounter today is our perception of the origin of human history. Most books on civilization would say that we started from one species to another species, a kind of evolution, and a group of people who started the journey of mankind. But the religious texts are saying that no, human history began with one couple. We have not resolved this worldview in our textbooks. I know that we teach Introduction to History and Civilization in this university also, yet the fundamental textbooks are not free from this kind of biasness. The point I'm trying to make is that we have many things to do. If you think that you are a victim of Islamophobia, you have to address the fundamental problem by producing books that would be acceptable to the mankind, not only to Muslims, but to mankind. And you see that Quran always addresses mankind in this sense. And therefore, again, going back to Iqbal, I see that Iqbal was trying to revive the humanity of Rumi, the universalist. Yes, we are all part of one or another nation. But again, as a student of contemporary history, when we teach nationalism, we say that Hubbul Watan min al-Iman, that kind of ideas were propagated so much during the nationalist movements. But then, after nation states became independent, nation states took different directions away from humanity. What I see in Mr. Mahmudur Rahman's book is that he has tried to bring back that idea of universalism through his book, that yes, even now, a few minutes ago, he was saying political Islam came to Bangladesh, or the part which is Bangladesh now, in the 13th century. And that Islam was not dividing people. The reason that India was one of the richest part of the world in the 18th century was because Muslims ruled India for 1,000 years. And when Muslims ruled, they more or less followed Sharia. I know that many Muslims were also dictators. Many Muslims also had imposed their will on others. But generally speaking, as a student of history, I can testify you that Sharia allowed human rights. People had the freedom to work, economic progress, educational rights, philanthropic rights were free. And that is why India attracted European traders. So it is our tragedy that we have not been able to tell the world that India was the richest country in the world only because of Muslim rule. And I think Mr. Mahmudur Rahman has tried to give some idea in the context of present Bangladesh that we need to be committed to facts of history, not romanticizing history. So I congratulate Mr. Mahmudur Rahman for his book, and I wish well for everybody who has contributed to this function. Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you, Professor, for the enlightening words. And now, ladies and gentlemen, a few words of wisdom by the guest of honor of this ceremony, Professor Dr. Chandra Muzaffar, President of the International Movement for a Just World.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Professor Dr. Israj bin Haji Saruddin, covering rector of the International Islamic University, Mr. Mahmudur Rahman, author of the book we are launching, former advisor to the Bangladesh government, Associate Professor Dr. Shukran Abdul Rahman, Dean Kuliah of Islamic Revealed Knowledge and Human Sciences, guests of honor, deputy deans, heads of department, brothers and sisters, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Let me begin by thanking the organizers of this event for this very kind invitation. I'm honored and privileged to be here with you as a speaker on an occasion which I value a great deal because it is linked to the launch of a book, and a book which is undoubtedly a masterpiece. Before I share my views with you, let me make a little correction. In your brochure and in your introductory remarks, you referred to me as professor. I'm no longer a professor. I retired as Professor of Global Studies from USM about 7 years ago. So it is not really right to use that term. I want to tell you a little joke in relation to this. It's a little naughty in a sense, but it's a joke worth sharing. This is the joke about a Singapore family. They decided that their aged father, who was finding Singapore a little too claustrophobic, should spend some time in Johor Bahru, and brought him over to Johor Bahru. A man who was advanced in age. And after 5 or 6 months, the son and daughter-in-law came to Johor Bahru to take him back to Singapore, because they thought that he had spent some time already, in this different environment. But the man did not want to follow them back. He said, I like it here. I want to continue to stay in Johor Bahru. There's something special about this place. Even if you are not associated with a certain role, they still continue to respect you. For instance, he told his son and daughter-in-law, there's someone in this neighborhood who is a former teacher. He doesn't teach anymore. He hasn't been teaching for a long time, but they still call him Chegu. You know, the respected term for a teacher, Chegu. We have a judge in this neighborhood, someone who was once a judge. It's no longer a judge. It's not made a single judgment for 15 years, but they still call him Young Arif, term of respect for judges. We have got a general, former general here, who has not commanded an army for 20 years, but they still call him general. You've got a former ambassador here who has not served in any position as an ambassador. They still continue to call him ambassador. And the same thing with a former professor. And they still continue to call him professor even though he has not been a professor for quite a while. And this old man, he told his son and daughter-in-law, and you know, like in my case, he said, you know, I've not had sex for about 20 years, this old man, he said. But, you know, the people here, they still call me that, you know, the four-letter word, add ing, Singaporean. So, in other words, what you were saying was that even if you're not playing a particular role, they continue to respect you for whatever you have done in the past. Now, I know you would have caught the joke, but I don't think I should go into details. So this is the thing about referring to people in terms of their former role, you know, so perhaps it doesn't really matter how one addresses me. I'm glad to be here. And I want to say this, that as a student of politics, I found Mahmudur's book remarkable. It's full of historical insights. It is a book which explores what is really a vital challenge facing humankind today, the question of identity. The question of identity is a global challenge. It is a question that has evolved over time. We are confronted with new dimensions in this issue of identity. And Mahmudur has explored this in the context of one particular nation, how that space, that is Bangladesh today, Bengal in the larger sense, had acquired a Muslim identity. While he has touched on so many different dimensions of this very critical issue, I would like to draw your attention to just two, if I may, in his book. Number one, he looks at the challenges to the preservation and expression of Muslim identity in Bangladesh today. And the two challenges that he talks about, one is secular authoritarianism, which I think is the term he uses in his book. Secular authoritarianism or authoritarian secularism. I think it's authoritarian secularism, the term that he uses, describing a particular type of secularism, authoritarian secularism. And number two, he talks about the geopolitical realities that challenge Bangladesh's Muslim identity. I want to touch on these two very quickly, if I may. The challenge of secular authoritarianism, which in the case of Bangladesh, especially in the last few years, it has taken a hideous form. Suppression, marginalization, the imprisonment of people, their torture, their elimination, not widely reported in the mainstream media, but quite pervasive. this has enabled a particular regime to perpetuate its power. Now, this phenomenon that he talks about, authoritarianism, let us remind ourselves, is not confined to secular regimes. Any regime, whatever its label, whatever its ideology, can be authoritarian, and it can be brutal in its authoritarianism. And it is incumbent upon us to acknowledge, as Muslims, that there is also such a phenomenon as Islamic authoritarianism. It can happen, and it has happened. That in the name of Islam, even if it contradicts the finest, the most noble teachings of the religion, in the name of Islam, you can have authoritarianism. You can even have fascism in the name of our religion. This is the reality. And if we are honest in our scholarship, we must be prepared to acknowledge this, that this can also happen. You can have secular authoritarianism, you can have religious authoritarianism. And the only way to deal with it is for people to stand up, to speak out against this challenge. Whether it is secular or religious, the response to this type of authoritarianism is more or less the same. One must have the courage. One must have the courage, one must have the integrity to speak up, to defend certain values and principles, and to expose the wrongdoings. Because if you look at the impact of wrongdoings, it doesn't matter what ideological label one uses, the impact upon human beings. A person who is tortured, a person who is jailed, a person who is expelled, exiled, a person who is killed, the impact is the same. Which is why I think we must stand up against authoritarianism. I see that as one of the messages of the book. And this is what Mahmoodur has done all his life within the context of his own country. He has played a role which is praiseworthy, to say the least. He has spoken up, he has stood up, he has paid the price. He's been to jail for periods of time, and he has continued to uphold his principles. So that, I think, is the challenge that one faces in confronting authoritarianism. The other challenge is the challenge of geopolitical forces at work in any situation. And in the context of Bangladesh, it is perhaps a little more challenging than in some other situations, though it is not unique in that sense, because different countries are faced with different geopolitical challenges. In the case of Bangladesh, partly because of the role that India played in the 1971 liberation of East Pakistan, and this is mentioned in Mahmoodur's book, you find that India has sought to dominate Bangladesh, just as it has sought to dominate the rest of South Asia, which is one of the reasons, and I've written about this before, it's one of the reasons why SAARC, the Southeast Asian Regional Cooperation Entity, one of the reasons why it has not really succeeded is because of the tendency, the determination on the part of the Indian elite to want to dominate the region. You just have to compare and contrast SAARC with ASEAN to understand this difference. We also have a huge country within ASEAN, and that's Indonesia, whose population dwarfs the populations of the other countries. But analysts of ASEAN will tell you that Indonesia even when it was under an authoritarian regime for a long while, 32 years, it never sought to dominate ASEAN. It embarked upon this whole process of consultation, so much a part of our tradition, Mushawara, that sort of tradition, trying to seek consensus. And as a result of that, the other smaller countries in ASEAN felt comfortable. So this tendency to dominate is the geopolitical reality that confronts Bangladesh and other countries, Maldives, Nepal, Bhutan, even small countries now, they're beginning to react. And this is something which we must keep in mind. Whenever we talk about regional formations and regional politics, the one dangerous trend is the quest for hegemony or dominance on the part of one or two members who are much more powerful than the others. And I think Mahmudur has discussed this with a great deal of honesty in his book about this challenge that confronts Bangladesh. And it's made worse, and especially in the last 2 decades perhaps, with the sort of alliance that has developed between India and the US. Partly because of other geopolitical developments, the so-called threat of terrorism and the attempt to link the terrorism with Islam, and therefore any nation which seeks to establish an Islamic identity is suspect. And various Muslim groups, whether they're terrorists or not, become suspect. So you have a situation where this attempt to divide the world into us versus them, using this particular dichotomy, becomes a very big problem. And countries like Bangladesh, in a sense, have been victims of this. And this is what we have witnessed. And if I may add, though this is not highlighted in Mahmudur's book, the US's alliance with India, which has contributed to this very complicated situation, has been made worse in recent times by the devious, sinister role played by Israel. Israel, as you know, is a huge supplier of arms to India. She supplies not only arms to India, she also helps India, so it is said, in counter-terrorism. Because of her experience with the Muslims in that part of the world, in West Asia, somehow Israel feels it has the right to provide expertise, advice to India on how to deal with terrorism. And you can see the consequences of that. Indo-Pakistani relations, attitude towards Bangladesh, and so on. So this is the challenge. The role of Israel has made it worse in this equation. How do you overcome this? I want to be very brief about this. It's a huge challenge. How to overcome geopolitical realities of this sort. I suppose we have to make people aware. Not many people are aware of this nexus between India, the US, and Israel. We have to make people aware. We have to write about it, we have to speak about it. And you will find that the mainstream media will not entertain you. But nonetheless, I think it is very important. It is very important that we highlight this. I think it is also equally important that we make people aware that we should distinguish, make a very clear distinction between the type of militancy that we see in different parts of the world perpetrated by different groups, including what had happened in Colombo a couple of days ago. We have to distinguish that sort of militancy from the quest for genuine expression of identity. We must be able to do that. And for us Muslims, it's a very big challenge because there is a tendency to conflate genuine expression of identity with senseless, mindless violence and put the blame upon our religion and upon our people. That, I think, is another major challenge that we face, both at the intellectual level and at the level of mass education and mass mobilization. We also have to make sure that we govern our societies well. That's very important. Don't give an excuse to anyone. Govern well, meaning by which eradicate corruption, establish governments that are trustworthy. That's a very big challenge. And if we can do that, then I think the Muslim world has more than a chance of emerging as a civilization that can confront and overcome the challenges that we face today, people everywhere. And this is, I think, the message I would like to convey on behalf of Mohamedur's book, that we should reach out for that. We should reach out for the stars. And Islamic civilization has a role to play, more today than at any other time. I used to tell my students, if we are puzzled by the whole question of identity, actually the answer is in the Quran, the question of identity. The Quran is the only scripture that I know that acknowledges the importance of individual, cultural, and religious identity. It's there. You cannot eradicate it. It is part of Allah's divine plan. But at the same time, it is also that one scripture that tells us that we are one family. Humanity is one. There is a certain human consciousness and a certain human bond that we must also develop. And if we can understand that by reading his book, then I think we would have benefited ourselves and our fellow human beings. Thank you.
Thank you indeed, Dr. Chandra Muzaffar, for that brief and comprehensive postmortem of the book. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the awaited moment of the ceremony, the officiating address and launching of the book by Professor Dr. Isarji bin Haji Sarudin, the acting rector of International Islamic University in Malaysia. Let's have him on the stage. Please welcome.
Thank you very much, Dr. Akmal. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Salatu wassalamu ala ashrafil anbiya mursalin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. In the name of Allah, the most compassionate, the most merciful, all praise and thanks be to Allah. May the peace and blessings of Allah be upon Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, his family and his companions. Mr. Mahmudur Rahman, former advisor of Bangladesh government and author, and Madam Feroza Mahmud, respected Associate Professor Dr. Shukran Abdul Rahman, Dean Kuliah of Islamic Liberal Knowledge and Human Sciences, respected Professor Dr. Chandra Muzaffar, President of Just Movement, Deputy Deans, Heads of Departments, brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I'm very happy to be here today, especially meeting our old friends. We have Professor Abdullah Hassan, who used to be with me a long time ago, since 1986, I think. And we have Associate Professor Dr. Arshad
Professor Rashid Morton, these are all our old friends. I'm not as old as them, but we joined the university at the same time, around 1983 or 84, if I'm not mistaken. So thank you for being here, and also thank you for organizing this ceremony. It gives me great pleasure to extend to all of you a warm welcome and best wishes on behalf of Director of the International Islamic University Malaysia, Tan Sri Professor Emeritus Zulkifli Abdul Razak, to this book launching ceremony. Currently, he is in Bosnia for a prior engagement. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I'm pleased to be present here this afternoon on the occasion of the book launching ceremony of the book entitled The Political History of Muslim Bengal, an Unfinished Battle of Faith, authored by our respected Mr. Mahmudur Rahman, a former energy advisor of the People's Republic of Bangladesh, an accomplished editor of a famous newspaper in the country. The book was published by Cambridge Scholars Publishing UK on the 1st of January 2019. So it is a matter of great pride for IIUM that the writer is a PhD student in the Department of History and Civilization of this institution. Thank you for selecting us. The Political History of Muslim Bengal, an Unfinished Battle of Faith, is a book about the history of a millennium of Bengal, starting with the story of the spectacular spread of Islam in the esteemed part of the Indian subcontinent, where the indigenous population of other faiths were most receptive to the egalitarian message of the great religion among the whole of India. The writer then chronologically records the history of 550 years of independent Muslim sultanate, nearly 2 centuries of British colonial rule, a quarter century of Pakistan era, and 1971 liberation movement of Bangladesh. He then shares with us post-independent governance in his country. Mr. Rahman has also highlighted the challenges that Islam is facing under the current global geopolitical situation. His attempt to find a middle ground on the issue of nationalism and the concept of global Islamic Ummah is also notable. His idea of fusion as a solution can be a subject of rich academic discourse. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, Malaysian scholars and students may find some similarities with our history in reading the book. The advent of Islam in this part of the world is associated with traveling of Arab and Indian merchants from the 13th century onward. The arrival of Islam in the peninsula largely coincided with the rise of Great Port of Malacca. We had also experienced the British colonial rule from the 18th century, similar to what Mr. Rahman has written. I truly believe that this book on the history of Muslim Bengal will greatly enrich our knowledge about the religion. Bangladesh and Bengalis have become important part of our country and society during the last quarter of century. Even for IUM, the Bangladeshi students is among the biggest number of international students at IUM, and we continue to welcome all of you. Without doubt, it is extremely important for us to know more about the country and its people. The political history of Muslim Bengal gives us an opportunity in that direction. Finally, I wish great success for the author of the book. I'll also urge my colleagues and students to read this history of the success of Islam and share it with your family members and friends. For your information, in 2020, Malaysia will become the world book capital by the Director General of UNESCO. That is next year. Only 20 cities in the world hold the title. More than 100,000 books will be published by the world capital, that is Malaysia. And IIUM will contribute about 120 titles. 120 titles. But we want our international students from more than 100 countries to contribute at least 2 books per country, whether it is an original book or a translated book. At least 2 books per country. But of course, I believe Bangladesh can contribute more than that. So 2 titles per country. So we expect our fellow colleagues here, all the PhD students and our staff and all our friends who are in the department can contribute to produce by 2020 at least 2 books or translated books. I'm very happy again to be here and to see all of you. I hope all our colleagues continue to support us, IIUM, and we welcome all of you to be here again, whether you have been here for 20, 30, or 40 years, or you have been here for 1 year. So, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, with great pleasure and with Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, I hereby officially launch the book, The Political History of Muslim Bengal, An Unfinished Battle of Faith. Wabillahi taufiq wal hidayah. Wassalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and thank you.
Thank you. Prof. Sarji, please remain on stage for the next event. To join Prof. Sarji on stage, we would like to welcome and invite Dr. Helmi, HOD of Department of History and Civilization, Dr. Chandra Muzaffar, and the author himself, Brother Mahmudur Rahman, to be on stage. Thank you very much, Professor Sarji, Dr. Chandra Muzaffar, and also Dr. Helmi. You may all be seated. Now, we'd like to welcome Brother Mahmudur Rahman himself to deliver his speech.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Honorable Professor Dr. Isarji bin Haji Saruddin, Governing Rector of International Islamic University, Malaysia, guest of honors, the Dean of the Kuliah, Deputy Deans and Head of the Departments, brothers and sisters, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. It is my greatest honor that the Department of History and Civilization of this great institution, International Islamic University, Malaysia, has kindly organized a book launching program for my rather ordinary intellectual endeavor to write about the millennium-long journey of Islamic faith of the people of Eastern Bengal, the present-day independent Bangladesh. It has been a long, eventful, spiritual, and at the end, a satisfying journey. Bengal, the world's largest delta, is not only divided by an international border between India and Bangladesh, the people of the eastern bank of the great river Ganges. The characteristics of the division are also cultural and religious. Bangladeshis, the people of the eastern bank of the great river Ganges, are nearly 90% Muslims and have a rich and unique culture developed through a fusion of the egalitarian, monotheist message and rich heritage of Islam with indigenous customs and language. Bengalis on the other side of the international border are predominantly Hindus in faith and practice a culture which has fundamentally sprouted from Aryan and Brahmanical caste-based roots and customs. In my book, I have tried to narrate the story of Muslim majority Eastern Bengal only. The manuscript of the political history of Muslim Bengal was completed when I was in prison as a prisoner of conscience. This book is the outcome of more than a year of intensive research done in a very difficult place and condition. After my release from the prison at the end of 2016, I worked for 1 more year for proofreading and final editing. I consider myself extremely fortunate that a reputed publisher in the United Kingdom decided to publish a book whose title clearly gives a strong Islamic flavor. You may agree with me that in the 21st century, we are living in a challenging world where Islamophobia is rising alarmingly. What Professor Chandra Muzaffar has said so well about the issue, about the challenge. Believe me, it was not easy to convince the publisher in England to keep the title of the book unchanged. My humble gratitude to Allah, the Almighty, the All-Compassionate. Unfortunately, Islamophobia also exists in Muslim-majority Bangladesh as a result of neo-colonial political and cultural aggression. This book is my answer to Bangladeshi Islamophobes. Simultaneously, this is also my personal journey to the roots. The respected professors have spoken quite extensively about the content and quality of my book. I am not at all worthy for all their praises. However, I am grateful to all of you, sirs, for your words of encouragement. I do not want to tax your valuable time by giving a long speech. I am thankful to everybody present here this afternoon who have taken the trouble to grace the occasion by their kind presence. I convey my special thanks and gratitude to all the members of the organizing committee and the volunteers of this program. Your precious and invaluable support will inspire me immensely to continue writing even at this fag end of my life. If Allah wishes, my desire is to remain intellectually productive until the day I eventually return to my Creator. Thank you all. Please keep me in your prayers. Thank you.
Thank you, Brother Mahmudul. Now, the Department of History and Civilization would like to give a token of appreciation to Brother Mahmudur Rahman. We now invite Dr. Helmi to give a token of appreciation to Brother Mahmudur Rahman. Thank you very much, Dr. Helmi and Brother Mahmudur Rahman. Ladies and gentlemen, with that, we have come to the end of the ceremony. Thank you all to those invited guests for coming. There is going to be a photography session in a short while. On behalf of the organizer, the Department of History and Civilization, our apology of any shortcoming, and may Allah bless you all in your endeavor and undertaking. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Yes, photography session. And after that, you're all invited to our refreshment. Thank you very much.
Okay, everybody, can you come forward to take photo, group photo with the VIPs? Come to the center of the hall, facing to the stage, facing to the stage.